What's going on, faithful? Welcome back to the Gilded Gang Podcast. I'm your host, Will Deal, and today I just want to talk about some of the comments that I heard from George Kittle today, who was on the Dan Patrick Show, and just want to talk about what he thinks watching Brock and his thoughts on whether Brock or not will start Week 1. So, point blank, at sort of the later part of the questioning or should I say the questioning, the interview, Dan Patrick actually asked George, if he thinks that Brock is going to start Week 1, and he said, "Oh yeah, of course." And so he apparently also said that he's seen Brock throw on the side, and that he's looking good, he's looking confident, and so he thinks he'll be at full strength and ready to go. Of course, he's again, this isn't too crazy type of news, right? Like this isn't very surprising. It's really to be expected. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Kittle who is just a huge supporter of Brock and has been, and he's really a big supporter of anyone who's in there as QB1. So that's one thing I'll give George, because I think people don't realize, even going back to 2017, when he was having to catch passes from anyone and everyone, from CJ Beathard to Nick Mullins and all these guys. 2017, definitely 2018, I should say, because that's when the ACL happened with Jimmy. But he's caught passes from just a multitude of guys, and he's pretty much always been consistent in support of those guys. But I will say this: I think that one reason that George feels so strongly about his support of Brock is that he wins, right? I think one of the reasons why some of the playfulness started with George and Jimmy. He's wearing the T-shirt with Jimmy on it and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of that love stemmed from the fact that he was winning, right? He was winning ball games. It didn't really matter how Jimmy was doing it, and if it was pretty or not, he was getting the results. And I think George really appreciated that. I think more than anything, the guys, they want to win, and so when you have somebody that just wins and they do a great job. And in Brock's case, he pushed this offense, and that's another thing that he was talking to Dan Patrick about. George was that the offense was scoring over 30 points a game. So when you have a guy that's doing that type of thing on the field every Sunday or Monday or Thursday, and sometimes Saturday. But when you have that stuff going on, right, it's kind of easy to root for the guy. I think the other thing too, the other element of this that is important is, I mean, George caught 11 touchdowns, the best of his career last year, and a lot of them were from Brock Purdy. Brock is a guy who he actually threw to his tight ends a lot in college. Especially the big number, I want to say 85, Charlie Kohler, who he worked with at Iowa State. And he just kept finding that target over and over and over again. And remember, that was an offense where he had Breece Hall in the backfield as well. And he had another receiver by the name of Hutchinson, number 8, who he also targeted a lot. He had another guy named Skates who he targeted a lot. So he had weaponry. There were plenty of weapons, but his guy that he liked to hit a lot was Kohler. And so it doesn't shock me that in that tight end, pass happy offense that he was in at Iowa State translated so well to what he does here in San Francisco, having a big tight end that's such a great target in George, whether it's underneath or on deeper seam routes. I think most of us will remember that game last year where George literally took that touchdown away from Ray McLeod in the end zone. But, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that George stepped in and got that touchdown, because that was somewhat, again, of a confidence booster for him and for Brock, that not only can he find him underneath, but he can find him going deep 40, 45, 50 yards down the field. And so, I just think that obviously, again, there's a lot of bias there, but I think it's actually bias that's warranted. It's actually based in the evidence that he saw last year, and that was all good evidence of what Brock can do, especially having weapons that he has in this offense. I think that what George sees is a guy who can distribute the ball, get it out on time. He has more mobility than Jimmy. I don't think any of us will argue that, especially after that 2018 ACL injury. So, someone who has plenty of mobility and someone who really understands where the offense is needs to go, where the ball needs to go in this offense, and where and what is needed in that game, right? So I think that was another thing we saw from Brock. I know that the sample size is still fairly small. You're talking about 7 full games, 8 overall, and it doesn't appear as though you should kind of anoint the guy, and I understand that. I totally understand that, especially with people comparing it to what happened with Jimmy in 2017, those last 5 games, all of that. But I do want people to kind of circle back and also understand that Jimmy, I think, threw 7 touchdowns and 5 picks in those 5 games. So that that's very different than what Brock did in throwing 13 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions as a full-time starter, right? He threw that 1 pick garbage time against the Chiefs, but 13 touchdowns and 3 interceptions when it mattered, when he was a starter, in those 7 regular season games to end the year. I think that speaks so much of who he was. I'm sorry, 6 regular season because he played 2 in the postseason. Uh, but that just speaks volumes. Still, that's even more impressive, right? He played only 1 more game than Jimmy, and you're talking about a guy who threw 13 touchdown passes, 6 more touchdown passes than what Jimmy did at the end of that season. And he made some great plays at that in that season with a much less talented roster. So I do want to say that as well. But nevertheless, Brock was a reason why a lot of the plays, stayed alive. And then people forget. But that throw that he made to McCaffrey, kind of outside the numbers, was about a 30-yard throw, touchdown to the corner of the end zone. Those were throws that just didn't exist in this offense under Jimmy or any other quarterback for that matter that's been here so, for the last, especially the last 7, 8 years. So, though that was something that was really impressive. He also scrambled for a touchdown against Tampa Bay in that same game, right? That the famous little kind of back and forth, and he kind of jumps into the end zone last second. It's just those are the kind of things, those kind of plays that Brock does bring to the table, and we've yet to see anyone else do it. Not saying that the other guys on the roster can't, especially with Trey's mobility and even Darnold to some extent has some mobility. But again, we both view this as obviously Brock 1, Trey 2, if everyone's healthy, right? If everyone's healthy and ready to go, I want to say most of us probably would say that's 1 and 2. If Brock for some reason has a setback, is not healthy, that's when you could say, okay, well, you know what? That's when we got to put Trey in. And obviously, assuming Trey continues to have a really good camp, has a great preseason, you see what you have there. Maybe Trey plays really well, and then you can make a decision at that point. But again, we are so far away from that point here on June 13th that I don't want to even entertain the idea of, okay, this is what we're going to do, especially considering all of these reports that are coming out, right? And even what George just said, he's seen Brock throw, because I think up until this point, I could be wrong, but Kyle had said that he was throwing, but he hadn't seen him throw. So the fact that some of the players are now actually seeing Brock throw the ball and can see that, he's throwing a football again. Again, we don't know at what range he's throwing at. Is he going at it at 50%, at 60%? From what I understand, everything that I've heard and everything I've read, he's going to be in a slow ramp up process. So I know he's not throwing, 15, 20-yard outs already. I don't believe he is, just based on everything I've read and everything I've heard. So, just I think but still, it's such a big deal, right? It's such a huge deal that this guy is throwing a football already because it was believed that he was going to make a full recovery, but not necessarily that he was going to be 1 to 2 weeks ahead of schedule, which is where he is, right? And he may have not even been throwing a football when the initial surgery took place, which remember it was delayed by a few weeks too. So not only is he ahead of schedule, but he's ahead of schedule on a delayed timetable already. So that's all really encouraging. So I think as long as that continues, as long as that progresses, I don't have any reason to doubt what George said on Dan Patrick's show today that he sees Brock Purdy as the QB1 and as the starter for week one. Because remember, as I mentioned in my first episode, the the thing that we had heard, I believe it was Matt Mayoko who reported initially, was that Brock will be cleared to play football on August 21st, right? So not just cleared to be at practice, none of that. Cleared to play full contact football by August 21st. That doesn't mean he will get in on that last preseason game on the 25th against the Chargers, but it means that he's cleared to do so. So that'll be a decision that will be based off of where he's at, how he's looking, what, if Kyle even thinks he should be out there for a series or not. That's a whole decision between Kyle and John. That's a whole other thing. But we're just talking about this guy being at full health, at full strength, which to me is excellent news. Regardless of where you lie on this situation of, do you want to see Brock start? Are you worried that they're going to rush him or not? Those are all valid concerns, completely valid. And I encourage you, again, some of you have already started in the comments and commenting on past videos on that stuff. Please continue, because that's a really good back and forth. And I really enjoy kind of getting into that. But just the fact that he's doing that well and guys already seen him throw, that's really good news. And again, it doesn't hurt to have one of the captains, right? Really one of the leaders, the heartbeat type of guys on the team in George Kittle. I mean, there's not that many guys on the team that I would say, that many other guys that I would say are as influential when they speak, especially because George speaks often, right? He is one of the more willing mouthpieces for the locker room, for the team. So when he says these things, you have to believe that the rest of the locker room is there in lockstep with him. So that means Fred Warner is right there with him. It means that Trent Williams is right there with him. It means Nick Bosa is right there with him. And it means CMC is there too, and along with other guys, Juice, right? So all these guys, Debo, Ayuk, those guys are all right there with him, most likely on what he's seeing and how he feels about Brock being the week one starter. So again, I just wanted to drop in and give my thoughts on that. I really wanted to make sure that I chimed in. And if you like the channel and you like the content, make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate your time, Faithful. Take care. See you later.